your memoir, which was what we talked about on Monday, was a kind of fire sale of your autobiographical material that informed a great deal of your fiction. So now that you are at the end of the blowout sale, I'm curious what it feels like to live with those consequences of not having that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's scary. I've relied on these schmucky personas for so long, which is not to say my new character isn't a schmuck as well, but they've been, the Russian, I'm a SAP, I'm a Soviet Ashkenazi pessimist. And for me, these characters are extensions of myself. They're exactly these kinds of people. They can't separate themselves from where they're from, and they can't figure out where they're going. But for the first time, I had a character who actually does stuff. He's a hedge fund manager. I mean, he's destroying his hedge fund as the novel goes along. But it was very, and so to research it, I met people who actually did things, which usually I'm in the artistic community in New York where we just sit around and cry into each other's coffee mugs. But I spent years and years hanging out with people who, in the course of a day, moved billions of dollars, fired people, had people impaled on stakes. It was, it was something very new. But to create a character who was different from my usual sort of the passivity, the nebbishness of it, that was a lot of work, and it felt like I was exploring something different from what I usually do. And so naturally I'm very worried, and that's why I wanted my first reading ever to be in Seattle, because this is a supportive community. Seattle is the safe space for people from all around the country, really.
And in that process of switching gears from not just mining autobiographical material for fiction, but also switching gears from your last book, which is a memoir, to back to fiction, did you experience any false starts?
I did. I mean, really, writing Little Failure it really was very trying in the sense that I had to confront everything that's ever happened to my family, going back generations. I had to confront my own relationship with my parents, which was fraught at best, but also very loving. So having done that, being able to be free, I went nuts, and I thought, all right, I'm going to do something nobody ever expected. And I started to write an international thriller. That's right. And it was going to be set in 14 different cities. It was going to be 800 pages long. Because everyone loves to read, right? Everyone. It's a country of readers. And so I got through the first 160 pages, which covered, I believe it started in Bangkok, and we went up to Beijing, and then skirted down to Bombay, and I was just starting Seoul. And I thought, I'm sure this is really great, but why don't I just show it to my editor? I bet she'll buy me dinner or something. But there was no dinner. There was no dinner. Instead of dinner, she sent me back comments, and it was 160 pages, and she sent me back 160 pages of comments. So each line had its own problematic comment. It was. I've never had a false start before, and that's probably because I usually use the material that I'm so familiar with. This propels this. The first novel was I was 20-something-year-old, and I wanted to write about another 20-something-year-old. What do you do when you're in your 20s? You're going to write about yourself. The next novel was about oil politics, Absurdistan. The third novel was about technology, super sad true love story. Thank you. Yeah. You guys know better than I do. I outsource everything. I never write my own stuff. Because there's better writers in Bangalore who can really get this stuff done, whereas I can't. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So we did that, and then the memoir, of course. But here I really didn't know I didn't know what I wanted to say about the world. I've been around. I used to be a travel and leisure contributing editor, so I spent huge. That's a great job when it was around, just traveling around the world and staying in nice hotels. And so I thought, okay, I can turn that into a thriller. But I ran into a whole bunch of problems. One of the problems was that, first of all, the main character had a sibling. She was a woman in search of her brother, and I don't have a sibling. Russians don't breed in captivity. So without a sibling, there was, I tried to write about this connection quite a bit, but I just couldn't get it done. And the other part was also that as 2015 gave way to 2016, my feeling was that writing a so-called global novel might not be as interesting as writing a novel about America, because, I've written books like Absurdistan, which are set abroad, set in the former Soviet Union, and I always thought that that's where the problems were. But as 2015 turned to 2016, I started thinking, holy crap, maybe I'm sitting on top of the volcano here. Should I start maybe researching America? I've heard such good things about it. But, I haven't crossed the Hudson River. Who has, right? But maybe I should. And that was the genesis of this book.
And you've been, even with the False Start, you've been, remarkably on schedule. Your novels have a consistent schedule of coming out in off-year election years. First novel in 2002, and one following every 4 years since, until 2018.
10, 14,
so this is all 5 right here, right? So every 4 years. So you have, what appears to be a very, rigid, work schedule. So, it's hard for people to imagine sometimes what it's like to be a writer. We think of writers as people who are visited by muses at night, and things are produced on the
Nobody
whim, but it's
visits me at
work.
night, yeah.
Right, assuming it's hard work. What's it like to be a writer?
So the plan is always every 4 years, 2002, 6. Yeah, it's like a regular bowel movement. Every 4 years, this just plops out of me, and and like I said, this was the hardest bowel movement ever, because something different came out and had to be. But we had some stool softener, and the first draft of this was written in half a year, so that was very fast.
Wow.
So, but as a writer, you're also, these days, because people really don't like to read, you're also going around the country and the world begging people to write a book. So even if writing a book takes 2-3 years, right, it's at least a year and a half to promote a book, because, you're in Akron, Ohio, or Oklahoma City, and you're just begging people, please buy this book. The only real audience that is you can always count on is the Pacific Northwest, and then Germany and the Scandinavian countries. It's the climate or what it is, but you will always be well-read in those countries, and I love them. But the writing schedule is I wake up late because, I'm a little hungover. So 11 o'clock, I'm up at the break of 11. And then the breakfast begins, and that's an important part. A gentleman comes from outside and delivers like a kind of, arepas. I love the Venezuelan food. So arepas with a touch of chicken and egg. It's delicious. I eat that until about 12:30. It's long, and many coffees. And then I work from 12:30 to 3:30. So I have 3 hours of hard work.
And you write in bed, right?
In bed. I write in bed. I don't like to move much. So I write in bed, and after 3:30, like most New Yorkers, I see my psychiatrist. So, so he's uptown, I'm downtown, so that's from 4:15 to 5. It's a 45-minute hour, which really is it's not fair. And then at 5 begins we meet at this cafe, Cafe Sabarsky, at the Neue Galerie, this Viennese gallery, because everyone has now it's post-Freudian, now there's a lot of Lacanians too, but we meet there for strudel and Café mit Schlag. So that's the 6 to 7, and then from 7 to 12 is the crying hour, but 5 hours. This is where writers cry about the state of publishing at a local par. And then I sleep for 11 hours. You don't look like this without 11 hours of sleep. This is prime Steingart you're getting, and then the horrible cycle begins again. The pain, the crying, the bad work.
So how, with this, the painful cycle, the predictability of your life, how, do you have a vision of how long you want to go on writing? Do you have some number of books you want to write in your lifetime on this rigid schedule?
Yeah, so for some reason, I decided that I want to write 12 books.
Okay.
So 10 novels and 2 memoirs. So I've done 4 and 1, so I'm so bad at math.
7 left.
7 left, of which 1 should be a memoir, right? Yeah. So and I using mathematics, I figured out that the last book will be written when I'm 74. So I'm 46 now. 45? I don't know. I don't keep track. Something. And at 74, it's going to be, that's it, basta, and I can die. And that's it. I'll perform my duties. My kid will be in graduate school, hopefully. And I can, at UW maybe, and that's it. That will be the end of my career.
Okay, very, very precise. You have it all mapped out. Bis 120, I guess they say.
Yeah.
But you live to 120. So.
Not going to happen. Not with my genes. Russian men live to like 56. That's the big age.
Yeah. I guess you're approaching that, sort of fateful.
I know.
Well, there's several kind of stages. 37 is also bad for Russian men because Pushkin was killed in a duel.
And I duel a lot.
Yeah, so it's like one of those things that you're up hearing about.
Yeah. 20 paces, that's my favorite.
So, Janice had mentioned in her introduction this sort of, idea about, your last novel was a dystopian novel. You wrote a dystopia back in 2010. This is your second novel since then. I guess your only novel since then.
Yeah,
back when that novel came out, you gave an interview where you talked about, somebody asked you, why'd you write a dystopian novel? And your answer was something like, dystopia is my middle name, I grew up in Brezhnev's Soviet Union, and then we moved to Reagan's America. Which is a really great line to kind of think about how that worked. So that was back in 2010. And you created what then seemed like a futuristic, somewhat far-fetched version of America. And now that novel reads like historical fiction. Because you predicted, there's a long list of things that came true. You predicted something like Occupy Wall Street about a year before it happened. You predicted onion skin jeans.
Yes. See-through jeans, it's a thing now.
Right. You predicted the harvesting of digital data that could be used towards pernicious ends by corporations and governments. Yeah. And the kind of moral, intellectual, and civic degradation of America and the role of social media in that process. And, look at our Twitter-in-chief now. So what's really interesting to me about this novel, about Lake Success, is that even though that novel towards the very end in the epilogue shifts into the future, sets about 10 years in the future, most of it is set in 2016, the way that it reads is sort of this astonishing version of the present that, from the vantage point of 2010, maybe seemed distant. So I'm curious, what it is that you sort of saw then, when you were reading tea leaves, that would turn that novel from 2010 into essentially historical fiction and shift your timeline, in a sense, about a book that's now coming out in 2018, written about 2 years earlier, as also reading it as a kind of dystopia.
Yeah, no, I'm like the Nostradamus of 2 weeks from now. Yeah, everything came true really, really fast. We were trying to adapt this for TV, and it was just like, what are you going to do? It all happens. You can't really set it in a futuristic way. I remember one of the sort of inciting incidents, to use a Hollywood term, for Super Sad True Love Story was I had my television broke, my cable box broke, and I invited the cable repair person to come and fix it. And like my protagonist in that book, Lenny Abramov, I had this huge wall of books, and he came over. He was a young guy. And he was like, "Oh, God, why do you have all these books? And such a small TV." He was disgusted by the books. He really, yeah. And he kind of said, it smells weird in here. Is it the books? And I was like, no, it's me. I work in bed, There's still, arepas in the bed. And that kind of clicked, and I thought, oh, in this future, people will think books smell, and they'll find them disgusting. It won't be Fahrenheit 451 where they're burned. It'll just mark the person who has them as the most disgusting human being you could be. And that, hasn't fully come true, but you feel the trend toward that. The other thing that from Super Sad that really, really, really scared me, which was about a couple of weeks ago, in Super Sad, people have rankings that if you enter a room, immediately there's your personality is ranked by others, so everybody crowdsources. Your sustainability, and my favorite ranking, your fuckability. So every time you move around, these scores are constantly updated by the people in the room. And the big score is your credit score. And a lot of this, the personality score is partly based on how patriotic you are and how much you help the government, et cetera. China recently came out just a few weeks ago
That's right.
with, I mean, they stole my IP. I'm really pissed off here. There's now a score that does very similar things. That ranks you, who your friends are also on social media. So if you're friends with a dissident, your score will go down. All these different things. And partly this is also monetized. So they want to do it. This hasn't been fully implemented yet. But so you're friends with a dissident. You want to fly from Beijing to Shanghai. Your air ticket will depend, the price of your air ticket will depend on your score, right? So if you've been bad-mouthing Xi or whoever's in charge, you pay 400 renminbi and 200 if you're a good, solid citizen. Anyway, this is all happening so fast that the feeling I have now is that, what does a writer do if remember the old realist writers, social realism, what do you do if you want to write about the present? There is no present. It's gone. By the end of today, it's gone. When people were trying to write the jacket copy for Supersad, they said, should we say it's set 20 years in the future? And I said, no, it's set Tuesday, next Tuesday. And that's what it feels like. And so for a writer, there's a kind of, no wonder blogs are a thing, because how do you keep up with this
Ephemeral.
stuff? Ephemeral. It takes, like giving birth, it takes 9 months from the completion of a final manuscript for a novel to even plop out, So even in those 9 months, not to mention the 2 years or more that it takes to write a novel, so much changes.
Right.
It's very depressing.
Huh. Yeah, no, and to do that, right, to write the novel, you do research. And one can imagine reverse engineer the way that some of your research must have happened. Obviously there's your own life for your previous novels, but for Russian Debutante, you'd spent your year abroad in college in Prague, so that became the sort of fictional Prava. For Absurdistan, you must have hung out with Russian oil men and rich people back in St. Leninburg.
And in Azerbaijan.
And Azerbaijan also, back in the 2000s. For Supersad, I think you wrote it somewhere, that you were just kind of sitting outside your office at Columbia and listening to young people speak to get the lingo from the time.
God bless them.
And yeah, so I'm wondering, in doing research for Lake Success, for the novel that's coming out, what sorts of people did you end up spending time with?
Well, I ended up spending a lot of time, as I mentioned already, with hedge funders. And many of them are very scary people, but some were actually quite nice. And many of them, like Barry, they wanted to do something bigger. And they're like, I'm trapped in this, job making $100 million a year, but get me out of this so I can teach for America, or cuddle with koalas, or something. But it was always just out of reach for reasons I couldn't quite understand, because I thought, hey, if I had your money, I'd be snorting koalas. But that wasn't quite happening. And their politics were kind of all over the place. Many Democrats, quite a few Republicans who were, quite a few people who supported Breitbart-type enterprises, actually. So that was I was very shocked. And the first time I heard something incredibly racist coming out of because you always think, okay, the wealthy people, you're surrounded by other people, you want to be gated here. If you're a full-on racist, be that in the company of your wife and servants, but not, out and about. But I've heard things that were absolutely shocking. And I thought, okay, well, live and learn. And the other component of my journey really was a journey by Greyhound bus from New York to La Jolla, California. A journey that, and I flew back a couple of times, but it took about 4 months. And it coincided almost entirely with the election cycle in 2016. So I'll put it this way. When I got on the bus in June or wherever it was, I thought, Hillary, of course, is going to win. There's no way in hell that she won't win. By the time I got off the bus in La Jolla, I was pricing Montreal real estate. I was shocked by what I had seen. There was so much that you just don't see in communities such as ours. But I saw, one of the scariest parts of the ride was, we were going through Alabama, Mississippi, and these white supremacists got on board and started talking very loudly about, crucifying Muslims and Jews. And I thought, oh, I'm one of those, aren't I? You forget, that you, whatever, but there's always someone nice to remind you in Alabama. And they were really talking about it really loudly, and I remember getting off in Shreveport. We'd already left, it was Louisiana. Getting off in Shreveport, and there was a nice Gujarati man running a convenience store for Greyhound passengers, and I bought a New Testament coloring book. That's using your head. And I got back on the bus and I was like, hey, Romans, yes. John 23:12, that's a good one. New Testament all the way.
In doing the, let's kind of, if you take this polarity, right, that you described, that there is, there is the very top of the 1% who run hedge funds, and then there is the rest of America, and Greyhound in particular, that is such the other extreme of this. In between them is your protagonist traveling and trying to understand the country. How do you, when you're on the, let me kind of take this as two different questions, I guess. One, when you're among the hedge funders, how do you sort of work your way into that sphere to be able to do the research that you need to do?
Good question. Well, so some of these hedge funders read books. So some of them had read, for example, Supersad was pretty popular. There's a bunch of tax exiles on the Virgin Islands, and they have a book club. And Supersad was their book club pick of the month. So while drinking $80,000 glasses of whiskey, they enjoyed Supersad. And they misread it completely. They thought it was an indictment of the Obama era. They read it the way they wanted it to read, and that it was a libertarian book about how we should all, move to the Virgin Islands and not pay taxes. So, people read whatever they wanted. But I met I have also many friends who are journalists, financial journalists. I recently did a piece for The New Yorker about a hedge fund gentleman, Michael Novogratz, that appeared a couple of weeks ago. So, I really did a lot of research, and I started to, I grew into this scary idea that I started to understand how the sausage was made, and it was all very frightening, and it relied a lot on connections, on leverage, and some smarts obviously involved as well. But the more I learned about it, the more, and also that year, hedge funds began to really fall apart. 2017 was, 16 and then 17 was two horrible, horrible years for hedge funds. And so people really started drinking quite a lot. I'd go out with the risk managers whose job was to make sure everything didn't fall apart. And we'd each consume a bottle of single malt whiskey. Now, I'm Russian. I can do a bottle of vodka, that's fine. But single malt, and I remember coming home at one point, and my wife found me in the corner at 4 in the morning, and I was trying to unbutton my shirt, and she had to help me. And that hasn't happened since fiscal year 2012. I haven't been that drunk in ages. But I really, I became friends with them, and I kind of, when they were doing well, I felt good. When they were doing bad, I really immersed myself in their world.
And I wonder also too, again, this is, fiction, live, different things, but I wonder if some of sort of their ways have rubbed off on you in some ways. I noticed, for example, that Barry Cohen, the protagonist of this novel, is an obsessive watch collector, and you have somewhat of a budding watch collection.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
It's very sad. Well, oh God, yeah, it's terrible. So during the election, I thought this isn't going well. And I needed to take my mind off something. And a lot of hedge fund people do collect watches. And so I started looking up watch sites, there's like a secret watch society in New York that you have to be invited to. And so I started being invited to the watch society. It's very nerdy, but it took my mind off the election. It was my way to not think about things because, when you learn about watches, all the nomenclature, this watch is this, and blah, 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 there's like a gazillion watches. And the one I'm wearing, by the way, belonged to Richard Nixon's space advisor, the NASA advisor for Richard Nixon. So this watch probably was there for some of the midnight drunken rants. Nixon's like, Jews, Jews, and this watch was there. Just think about good times. But it really did take my mind off things. And when I was writing about Barry, this is a person who can't deal with anything. He can't deal with his son's diagnosis. He can't deal with the fact that he's supposed to be a husband. He can't deal with the fact that he can't run a shop without being a crook. All these things are weighing down on him, and watches is his way to almost hypnotize himself by watching the seconds hand and to leave his body. So I've never had a hobby before in my life, and I hope to never again.
Barry, schools various people that he meets on the road about, ways in which he imagines their lives should be. And to those of them, he kind of has his watch collection as a model in a way for talking about people. And he has this phrase that, your watch collection, or every single watch really should tell a story. Yeah. Right? So what's the story of Gary Steingart's watch collection?
The story, so this is something that actually happened when I met one of my first hedge fund guys. I kept saying, well, what's the secret to your success? And he said, it's not metrics, it's not the algorithms, it's not this, it's that I know how to walk into a room and tell a story. Mm-hmm. So, and the story I tell my future investors is how we're going to make money together and how you're privileged to make money with me. And if I can get that story across to the, Abu Dhabi investment fund or whatever, or the Washington State Pension Fund, if I can make them believe in that they're going to make money with me as opposed to actually losing money with me, which is what's going to happen, then I will have succeeded as a hedge fund manager. And that just blew me away, And so Barry, as he goes around, he has a story for every watch he owns, which is very pedantic, but he tries to, that's his way of communicating that you don't have to be smart, you just have to be a storyteller. Mm. And to me, when I look at finance, when I look at all these nice bros from, little cross-playing guys, they're able to, straight from the frat house, and they're able to tell these stories, and I find that absolutely fascinating.
Wow, interesting. So there's a narrative there too, right? In your world, in your fictional world, there's a narrative, but for them, there's also this kind of...
Yeah, I kept thinking maybe they should hire me, because I tell stories.
Right, right.
And people give me money.
Right. Speaking of telling stories, Denise had mentioned this in her introduction, that Barry has kind of no sense for how cliched his ideas are, including about literature. He fancies himself to be somewhat of a littérateur. He majored in business at Princeton and minored in creative writing. Second major.
I think he actually majored in. I have to look this up. I haven't read this book in a while either.
I
think he's a major in
I think
the
second major is creative writing.
Oh, okay. Well, you know better than me.
There are two.
Let's ask Denise. She just read this thing.
So he does read a lot of white males.
Loves white males.
And he does definitely think that traveling across the country is like being on the road. Yep. Jack Kerouac, without any awareness that this is such a cliche in American fiction. But also, he is really enamored with F. Scott Fitzgerald, so much so that his now failing hedge fund is called This Side of Capital, right after The Side of Paradise. So in thinking of that, and you do this wonderful job playing very ironically with what these cliches can do for you as a writer, how you have this protagonist who doesn't know what you know. So I was also curious about, that made me think about, well, this is a new novel for you and you're moving to a different topic. It's away from this Russian Jewish experience. But I was wondering if pieces of some of the things that you were always interested in are still here in this novel. So I was thinking, for example, about your first novel, The Russian Debutante's Handbook, describes, Ponzi schemes in Eastern Europe after the fall of the Soviet Union. And in a sense, it's a critique of capitalism. It's a critique of Western-style kind of imposition of a kind of Western capitalist system onto a post-socialist space. Yeah. And what that looks like. And in a certain sense, Barry Cohen, with his hedge funds, made it seem to me that he was some distant, but maybe not such a distant cousin of Vladimir Gershkin.
Yeah.
So what is the difference between a hedge fund and a Ponzi scheme?
I guess there isn't one. I mean, ask Bernie Madoff. You bring this up, and it really is kind of interesting because in the Russian debutante's hand job, whatever, he goes back to, and he brings his American storytelling skills. He also goes to an Oberlin-like college.
That's right.
And he brings his storytelling skills to sell bullshit to these people, to young Americans. He has this investment firm that's never going to do anything. And so, what is the difference between Vladimir Gershkin, other than the fact that that Barry Cohen isn't Russian? They're really, very, very similar. In terms of the way they approach their economic future. So the more I think about it, the more, maybe I'm still writing the same goddamn book. Except, they should say it on the cover now with 90% less Russians. And that will sell, because there's only so many Russians.
That's not really how I meant it. I didn't mean it that you're writing the same book. What is really fascinating to no, that was, yeah. This is, by the way, right? This is the first time we're really talking about this book. So this is a completely unrehearsed conversation. So we don't know how this is going to go.
It's a lot of survey in the end.
We're trying out all kinds of ideas. But what I really was picking up on is whether there is, we were on the radio today and they asked us the question, about Russia and America and kind of the comparisons. And I wonder whether you're not writing about Russia here, but you have this deeper understanding. And I wonder whether, at least if you compare your early books and this, that you've maybe picked up on something that's about how, that kind of distorted version, exaggerated version, satirized version of American-style capitalism in post-Soviet Eastern Europe now is coming back to us?
Let me put this on a more emotional than intellectual level, because I'm no intellectual. But I'll say this, when I wrote Absurdistan, all that stuff, I would go to these former Soviet spaces, and a part of me wanted to write about them because I wanted to understand who my parents were, how their lives had been changed by where they had lived, because I had left at age 7. But a part of me also felt safe. I went there, it was horrible, I saw horrible things. And then I'd fly right back to JFK. I'd be embraced to the, pressed to Brooklyn. Life was okay, But the scary part about this book is that sense of entropy about the world that I had in writing about the post-Soviet spaces. Now I felt that it was coming here. My fear was always, my hope was always that Russia would become more and more like America, develop some idea of civic society, some kind of free markets. All of this stuff, not just kleptocracy and the same authoritarianism and the same oligarchic impulses. But what happened that was so weird was that America seemed to be becoming more and more like Russia. Right? This was something that I did not expect. And the reasons for that are very complex and would require somebody from the Jackson School who really has deep knowledge. And if such a person is here, I'll give you the mic. Oh, he's calling. Okay. They're calling him now. They're like, Jackson man, come on down. Very complex, and does have to do with, I think, the way capitalism was imposed, the shock therapy and all these other things, and the many things that happened afterwards.
Right.
Very much so, very much so.
So, and it's what's really kind of, what I find so intriguing about the novel is that it goes, you do a really good job, it goes deeper than Trump. And Barry is very naive in thinking that Trump is the problem rather than a symptom. He thinks that things will go back to normal when the election ends. And one other thing that you do in the novel, just as you did in Super Sad, which is also really, I'll ask you about that in a second, but some of the chapters are about Barry's wife, Seema, who is much more sensible. And they have this exchange where he tells her, oh, it's all going to be fine after the election. He wants to bundle for Hillary so that she could get a job with an attorney general's office when Hillary wins. And she tells him this election will never end. Right? And I wonder what that felt like for you to, again, I'm thinking about that time frame, right? You're putting that into a novel about 2016 as the election is happening, but you're writing it later. Where does that phrase come from?
Doesn't it feel like it'll never end? Even if he leaves, whatever, something has been opened up. It was like being on that Greyhound bus, and all of a sudden these two white supremacists got up and started talking very loudly. And everybody else in the bus, almost everyone except me, was African American. And they were talking very loudly about what they needed to say. And the people around, myself included, and the African American people as well, were pretending not to hear. We were pretending we were following. We did not want the conflict. There were two men screaming to each other, but, and at one point the bus went through Grambling State University, which is a historically all black college. I think Charles Blow of the New York Times is a graduate. And so there they were these two guys, and all of a sudden we were surrounded by, it was summer, but there was still, I guess, some kind of summer school program, and there were all these African American students who clearly were having an education that these two men did not have. And the anger they felt when they were confronted with these these black men and women was so palpable, and they said, well, this university, the police department must be really huge at this university. There was this incredible anger, but also this feeling of, one of them said, well, they got their universities and one day we'll have ours. I was like,
Wow.
I was like, let me show you Dartmouth. Because you got it, pal. You'll never get in, but it exists. But that really that was the moment where I was like, holy shit. What? This is not the country I mean, I thought some of this happened somewhere, but it was so, and they were quoting Breitbart and quoting all the, Flynn, great,
Right.
like Flynn. I mean, it was clear that this was an organized movement, that this wasn't just out of thin air. And that's when I realized, oh my God, we've been laughing at this stuff, but it's been happening. And it is happening, and it may continue to happen.
Right. And back to kind of the Seema is the one who has that phrase and really has that knowledge and foresight. You do dedicate a lot of, she has her own chapters. In Super Such a Love Story, Eunice Park, your female protagonist, also gets her own chapters. And another important conversation that's happening now in our society is about sexism and misogyny. And the literary side, there are many sides to this conversation, but one of them is about male writers writing female characters. So how do you think through these questions in your own work?
Well, I mean, obviously you want to do the best job you can, but at the same time, you want to give everyone the space they need to say to get things off their chest. So my dream is that even though Seema has slightly less real estate than Barry, she still has a lot to say. And Seema was the kind of character that I met quite a bit in hedge fund circles. The wife who is incredibly credentialed herself. Seema went to Yale Law School, clerked in the Eastern District, was primed to join a great firm. And she married somebody who has, 100 times more wealth than she could ever earn, because, in New York, you're either in finance or you're not. Even lawyers and bankers and lawyers and doctors are like, also Rands. They're just. There was this hilarious. It's a scene in this book, but it actually really happened when I met. I was having dinner with a hedge fund wife, and she was talking about this school called Ethical Culture. And she said, yeah, we send our kids to Ethical Culture because we love the diversity there. And I was like, it's mostly white. And she said, no, I mean the economic diversity, because some of these parents, some of these kids' fathers, they're not hedge fund guys. They're just doctors or lawyers. And that's kind of Seema. I mean, I like Seema as a character, but she says shit like that because that's the world she's lived in. She's lived in it so long that, I mean, this is what I noticed about people in this industry, that you spend a little bit of time in there and you can't understand what it's like to go to a restaurant and spend under $300 and not have, whatever, a $1,000 bottle of wine. Everything else just seems insane. And for her, I feel, especially because her husband can't deal with the fact that they have an autistic child, because she has sacrificed an intellectual life to being basically the curator of this family. Several of the women I've met would say things like that. I'm too busy curating my family's life to actually have a job. And for me, as a feminist, as a person who's married to a woman who's a very successful lawyer, this just felt shocking. This kind of abdication of responsibility was absolutely shocking. And I mean, I'll say this: that the one thing that from the Soviet Union that certainly I got was the fact that both my parents worked, and they worked equally. And this is, that was one modeling that I really took away from their relationship.
Right. So I'll ask you one last question before I turn it over to you to read from the book. This was, maybe just me as the particular inquisitor, right?
Inquisitor, the Grand Inquisitor.
The Grand Inquisitor. As me as the particular kind of, I'm interested in certain things. So I had this chuckle towards the end of the novel where, out of nowhere, a protagonist named Luba appears. And Luba looks like a composite caricature of a number of Steingart protagonists from your previous novels. She's Russian, she's Jewish.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe, right, exactly. Right. He's confused, he can't read her Slavic features, but she has a Jufro.
A big Jufro.
She grew up in America and speaks unaccented English. She's a Trump supporter. And I was sort of chuckling with delight. I'm like, this is the Gary Steingart that I know. In this whole novel that seems so new, this is the one. And then I was thinking about this, that sort of chuckle disappeared, and I was thinking about how quickly she left. She was gone half a page later. And I thought, this is like your interesting kind of a wink and a nod at yourself, maybe.
Yeah.
That this is like as though you're saying, this is the kind of novel I would still be writing if I was still writing about Russian Jews, if I hadn't moved from that topic somewhere else, if I hadn't had that fire sale. And then I was thinking about the titles of your last two books, right? There's Little Failure, which is, after the nickname your mother gave you, and also the nickname that Vladimir Gishkin's mother gave him in Russian Debutante's Handbook. The book is really not about failure. It's about becoming a successful writer, but that's the title. And then this one is Lake Success, which is a place in Long Island, and it's important to Barry for different reasons. And yet it seems as though, just as ironically, you are charting this trajectory from failure to success, from an immigrant writer to an American writer who can handle an American topic. Right. So who is Gary Steingart at the end of this conversation?
I don't know. Maybe we can focus group this. I'd love to figure out who I'm supposed to be now. In Lake Success also is the trajectory of a man going down.
Right, exactly. Yes, I forgot to say.
But failure is going up. Well, I'll tell you something funny, and please just don't tell anyone. Just keep it between ourselves. So one of the main editors at Random House, when I said, I'm going to call the book Little Failure, she's like, that's going to hurt sales. And I was like, what? And she said, people don't want to, they're in an airport, they're looking, and they're like, failure? Oh, that's not me. So I won't buy that. And they didn't. But this, baby.
The cover is beautiful.
Success. They're printing a lot of these copies. Success, I want to be on a lake. I don't know what all these letters are. Shit, cart, whatever, but I want to be successful on a lake. So this is exactly. It's going to come with sunglasses because it's so bright, this cover. So I'm ready for success.
You're ready, and we're ready for, and again, this is as a reminder, right? This is no recording of any kind. You are literally the first audience to hear this. No one else in the country has heard this.
So it could suck.
He rehearsed this yesterday for the first time, and here's Gary Steingart with Lake Success.
All right. Thank you. I may end up repeating some of the introduction that Denise so wonderfully made, but I just wanted to tell you again that I really started writing Lake Success when I realized that most of my friends had been exiled from Manhattan. They couldn't afford it anymore, and they were exiled to, to places like Berlin and LA and Abu Dhabi and Portland. You may have heard of it. And that they've been replaced, the one in Oregon, not in Maine, and they were replaced mostly by people who worked in finance and allied trades. These were the only people really left in my zip code, so I decided to write about them. And Lake Success is, as we mentioned, the story of Barry Cohen. He runs a hedge fund called This Side of Capital. He's actually running it into the ground. He's also being investigated by the SEC, whoops. And he has a disastrous marriage to his wife, Seema, and an autistic son. So with both of his business and his family life in disarray in true male fashion, he decides to, flee. And he does it on a Greyhound bus for complicated romantic reasons. And the scene I'm going to read is set in Atlanta, where Barry gets off the bus and visits his protege, Jeff Park, whom he actually fired from his hedge fund at one point. And one last note, of course, as mentioned, Barry collects watches. I'm really sorry about that. He just does. It's too late to give him another hobby, but maybe for the paperback, it can be something else. Jeff Park's living room was as palatial as the entrance to a modest New York museum. Enormous golden lights hung from the ceiling, which was at least 20 feet high. Jeff had a full head of hair, gums that didn't recede, and he did push-ups in the middle of the day. He had gone to Cornell, if Barry remembered correctly, but had not played lacrosse like most of the guys at his firm. So what's up, Jeff said. Just passing through, Barry, decided to look me up. They were sitting in Jeff's kitchen. He had brought out a bottle of Yamazaki 20-year and was serving it straight up, quite decadent for 1:27 p.m. What the hell did Jeff Park even do for a living anymore? He had cashed out of Barry's hedge fund with zero. All of this is going to sound crazy, Barry said. Uh-huh. I'm on a journey by bus. Barry knew that he would eventually have to explain his flight from New York to people in his tax bracket. He knew that news of his meltdown would immediately form the latest bulletin in the incestuous, bloodthirsty world from which he had sprung. But he doubted it would really surprise anyone. The people in his world could be nuts. One fund was essentially a cult with its own Bible, ritual mind control, and feats of strength. One fellow at another fund, a quant billionaire in training, played piano at a third-rate bar while passing around a tip jar. Like your first ankle monitor bracelet or your fourth divorce, the occasional break with reality was an important part of any hedge fund titan's biography. The things I've seen, Barry said, and he told Jeff a few of his Greyhound adventures so far. Jeff Park seemed interested. He poured more drinks. It sounds a little bit like you're doing a middle-aged version of On the Road, he said. That thing about the one-eyed Mexican guy in New Jersey who fell asleep on your shoulder, that's so Kerouac. That's exactly right, Barry shouted. No wonder he had picked Jeff Park to host him. The man had literary sensibilities beyond most of his colleagues. Oh, they really did a good job educating up at Cornell. I used to take the Greyhound to visit my uncle's family in Savannah, Jeff said. Everyone there looked at us like we were freaks. Everyone looks at me like I'm a freak, Barry said. You kind of are a freak, Barry. Barry took that to be the highest of compliments. He was bonding with his former employee. They were going to be friends. So, are you from around here originally, he asked. Yeah, I moved down here to take care of my parents. Your parents are, I want to say, from China? Close enough, Jeff Park said. My wife is Indian, Barry said. Rock, Jeff said. You ought to get married, Barry said, completely forgetting that his own marriage was but a team of 7 lawyers short of kaput. His instinct to help Jeff Park was overwhelming. He remembered Seema's friend, the Asian woman from Brooklyn, Tina, Lena. I threw away my cell phone, Barry said. Can I check something on your computer? A laptop was provided. It had been a week since he had touched a keyboard. He brought up Seema's profile. What a gorgeous family you have, Jeff Park said, pointing at the profile photo of Seema and Shiva. When I worked for you, I thought you were just about to get married. That kid of yours, those eyes. Yeah, Barry said, his hand frozen over the keyboard. But here's what I really wanted to show you. He scrolled through the list of Seema's friends until he found the right one. Now, this girl is spunky, Barry said. She called me a tool to my face. And I think she's pretty intellectual like you. Oh, one night in Brooklyn, she made these great Chinese dumplings for us. I bet your folks would love her. Mina Kim, Jeff Park read off the screen. Ah, not really up my alley. Barry was heartbroken. But she's Chinese. Jeff Park stared at him. I'm more into the Southern Belle type, he finally said. Oh, Barry said. But thanks for looking out for me. You're like that woman from Fiddler on the Roof. Barry sort of knew what he was talking about, matchmaker, whatever. Jeff Park had a wide cultural reach. Well, I'm going to make it my mission to get you married, he said. Nice guy like you. I'm not averse to the ladies, Jeff Park said. I've designed this place with them in mind. Huh, how so? Jeff Park took him on a tour, starting with a massive glass-top dining table. You see these lights, he said, pointing to a trio of Sputnik-style globes hanging over the mirrored surface. The average girl I date is 5'6", or an inch taller than the national average. I have a spreadsheet that lists the attribute of each girl I've ever dated. It's super granular. So if I'm making her dinner and she's standing there waiting for me, talking to me, maybe having a drink, the light from these lamps is directly level with her eyes. So she can see better and I can enjoy her glow. Barry was impressed by Jeff Park's thoughtfulness. A spreadsheet. The rap on guys in finance was all wrong. They cared too much. He knew he did. If you looked at it a certain way, he had abandoned his family because he didn't have the emotional bandwidth to accommodate their special needs. He examined the frigate-sized couch. This sofa is the perfect height for a 5'6" woman, Jeff said. When she sits down, the sofa waterfalls at the back of her knees. He invited Barry to sit down. You see, there's a gap of at least 3 inches between the back of your knee and the couch because you're tall. But if you were a 5'6" woman, you'd be snug. So you only date women of that height? Barry asked. Well, there's some variance, Jeff Park said. Maybe half a sigma. I don't want the tail wagging the dog, but yeah, mostly. You're a romantic, Barry said. Jeff Park shrugged and blushed. He was not unhandsome. His face was chiseled and tanned to perfection. The black athletic gear he was wearing made him look like a glossy seal in human form. Only the Rolex Sky Dweller on his wrist did not appeal to Barry's tastes. Upstairs, Jeff had an airy office with full view of the Atlanta Midtown skyline and that awful Coca-Cola tower. Barry felt a twinge of passion at the sight of a fully operating Bloomberg terminal. Jeff Park only had one screen going, which was cute. On a glass board, he had sketched out some trades that appeared exceptionally long-term and cautious, making some kind of play around Alcoa and Dow. Just scanning the numbers on the board, Barry assumed an AUM, assets under management, of 35 million, which in the best of worlds brought in, what, a couple million a year? He probably had a net of just 10, 15 million. And he could live on that and be happy and buy couches that waterfall the legs of median women. I trade maybe 2 hours in the morning, Jeff Park said, and then I spend the rest of the day working on myself. They passed a formidable wall of books. I read at least 100 books a year, and if I'm at, let's say, 70 by November, I'll take the rest of the year off to catch up. I like reading to the girls I date, like, Beckett plays and Chekhov stories and Shakespeare sonnets. Believe me, they need it around these parts. Wonderful, just wonderful, Barry said. This is what I'm talking about, real self-improvement, a vocation and an avocation. So many guys say, I want to die at my peak net worth, Jeff Park said, but not me. Clearly not, Barry said. Jeff now led him into a bathroom. They were looking at the double mirrors that function as TVs in the rain shower tub. The GOP convention in Cleveland was in full blaze. Ted Cruz was saying he would not be voting for Hillary, but he wasn't going to endorse Trump either. I used to stay at the Trump Hotel in Columbus Circle whenever I visited New York, Jeff Park said. Never again. I'm a moderate Republican, Barry said, socially liberal. They went downstairs for a new course of drinks. Jeff Park was making them with ruby red vodka and Seagram soda now. They sat at a table made from the cross-section of a giant tree. Its height was also designed to seduce an average woman. Barry felt around the serrated bark of the edges. He liked his furniture slightly rustic with hints of the arts and crafts movement. That was supposed to be the motif of the Rhinebeck house if he ever finished it. Who made this? Barry asked. It's a Japanese eucalypti, Jeff Park said. I bought it in Kokura. It reminds me of how lucky I am. Kokura, Barry said. Yeah, you never heard of the luck of Kokura? Barry had not. August 9th, 1945, an American bomber was headed to bomb Kokura on the island of Tinian. But there was too much cloud cover over the city that day, so the plane was diverted to Nagasaki. Wow, Barry said, that is lucky. Right, luck. See, if I were born in Bangladesh, let's say, I don't know, to a family of rag pickers, would any of this happen? He gestured at the 4,500 square feet of property. My mother worked as a maid in Buckhead when they got here. I still remember the food stamps with the drawings of the old whiteys signing the Declaration of Independence. I memorized the words on it, U.S. Department of Agriculture food coupon. Where else could a maid's son end up like this? That's why I always take care of my folks, why I'll always live in the same town as them. I've got to honor the luck that was given me. Barry thought of his own relationship with his parents. His mother had died when he was 5, but he had brought out his father's swimming pool company for $4 million, about 10 times what it was worth, so that his dad could finally retire. But after that gesture, and after his father's openly racist behavior at his and Seema's wedding, he mostly avoided the old man. He went out just once to La Jolla, California, where his father was living with his girlfriend Netta, whom he had found on an online Zionist forum. Netta was a former social worker and had 2 grown kids in LA. The moment she met him, she pressed Barry into her freckled décolletage and proceeded to give him a detailed tour of her beautiful garden, where she and Barry's father spent most of their time drinking coffee and looking at their laptops. Her house was a 1940s U-shaped ranch, the ideal of a California ranch, with back-to-back fireplaces, wild beehives in the pepper trees, little gardens of shiso leaf and miniature roses, 2 box turtles and a rabbit named Sylvester. There were plums that Netta's kids used to throw on the street to watch them get run over, and blood orange shrubs in the front yard, and mandarins and tangerines, and green romantica rose, and pink peppercorns, and magnolia trees, and pretty and pink Indian hawthorn blossoms, and in the middle of what even the Holy Bible would have to acknowledge to be the true Garden of Eden, sat two elderly people in their Make America Great Again caps, silently scrolling through the latest outrage to their common gene pool in the dusty hills and valleys of another land. "I'm so sorry about your son getting autism," Netta had said. "Did you give him vaccines? I'm sure that's what did it." "I told him not to get the vaccines," his father hollered from his perch beneath a plum tree. "I sent him the link about how the Somalian Muslims were spreading it through their doctors in Minnesota." Barry was out of there in less than 36 hours. 8 months later, his father was dead of pancreatic cancer. Maybe Jeff Park was just a better son, and maybe better sons made for better people, and that was why their mom didn't die in car accidents, their faces caked in blood. "But that's not luck," Barry said, returning to the theme of conversation. "Sure, it's not helpful to be born to rag pickers, but most of your success was the result of your own hard work and your parents' gumption to move here." "You don't consider yourself lucky?" Jeff Park said. "Not for a minute," Barry said. "You found yourself working in the right industry at the right time, no regulation, all the leverage you could eat from the banks. I'm not even going to mention the insider trading that's just part of being in the old boys club." "I don't think we're under investigation yet," Barry said, which was to say the FBI hadn't broken down their door. "Hey, I'm not knocking what we do," Jeff said. "It takes smarts, but so much of it is luck. You execute one good trade and people will listen to you for what you say for the next 5 years. All I know is I never had any advantages," Barry said. "I wasn't even lucky enough to have been born an immigrant." Jeff Park laughed. "Now that's funny," he said. They clinked glasses. After dinner, they drove to a mall in a former industrial building called Ponce City Market, which was like the Chelsea Market in New York, only it was in Atlanta. They climbed up the elevated tracks to a new park called the Beltline, which was just like the High Line in New York, only it was also in Atlanta. As they started down the rail bed, two women with thick Southern accents asked Jeff Park to take a photo of them with their phone. He said he would be delighted, his own accent reverting to what it must have been before Cornell sanded off the edges. The women wore very little and were almost beautiful. One of them, a tall blonde, had a cast on her leg. The other one was younger and had a goofy smile. "Now, the one with the cast, she's a classic example of the Southern belle," Jeff Park said, after the women had left them. "That's your type," Barry said. "Should we go back after them? You could offer them a ride in your Ferrari. They'd love that." Jeff Park shrugged. "I don't know," he said. "Probably not." The sun was setting and the humidity was unpleasant, but Barry wanted to walk deeply into the night. There were trees and grass all around them, and sometimes a clump of skyline would come into view. "So," Jeff Park said, "a part of me has to ask, and I know this may not be your favorite topic." Barry got this idea that somehow Jeff Park had found out about his son's diagnosis, which was a big secret. "Ask away," Barry said. "What the hell happened with Value Pro?" "Oh," Barry said, "that." Value Pro, RIP, had been a pharmaceutical company that Barry fell in love with many years ago. In fact, right after Jeff Park had been fired. He wasn't the only one, of course. Half the hedgies he knew had gone nuts for it. But Barry's erection was more pointed than the others, and it entailed at one point about half of his book. Value Pro had promised value, or per its name, value, V-A-L-U, but not to its customers who would see their pharmacy bills explode if they happened to be ill with some exotic but deadly disease of the tailbone or pudenda. No, the company promised mad value to its shareholders, and the phrase shareholder value was Barry's favorite. "We are a nation of shareholders," he had said more than once to Seema, his Democrat wife, trying to articulate his brand of no-nonsense but compassionate capitalism. Several times during his Greyhound trip, Barry had paused to consider that although he loved his fellow passengers deeply, he could not trust them at the voting booth because they were not shareholders. They did not understand the thrill and the pain and the obligation of owning a part of their country. In any case, Value Pro was run by a charming alcoholic nebbish named Sammy Yuntif. "Wait a second," Jeff Park said. "What's a nebbish?" Barry explained that it was a Yiddish term denoting a timid, submissive man. His father had hated nebbishes even more than he hated schnooks or schnorrers. Sammy Yuntif wore triple-thick frames and not so much cargo shorts as cargo pants and cargo shirts, the better to hide his pouches of fat. He twitched a lot, and he came across as the bad breath chemistry teacher you sort of had to love back in high school if you were at all generous with your teenage heart. "You're a smart guy," Sammy Yuntif had mouth-breathed the first time he met Barry. "You, no value." Barry hadn't been called smart since high school. He was intrigued and wanted to hear about Value Pro's business model. "Here's our business model," Yuntif said. "Fuck R&D. Fuck it. We're not going to cure cancer. We're not going to save the world. We're going to deliver value to investors like you." Delivering value meant buying foreign drug companies for cheap and then using them for tax inversion purposes. Barry loved this part. His hatred of our nation's tax regime was absolute. Why not pay taxes in Ireland instead? Or why pay taxes at all? Barry adored how Yuntif cared so little about appearances, this fat, fiery, Rutgers-graduated nebbish in a cargo shirt who would probably have been forced to hang himself at Princeton. He and Sima and Yuntif's sumptuous Sima-grade Croatian girlfriend whiled away 3 days on a yacht together off of Sardinia. The Nebbish and the Croat spent their time drinking caseloads of Prosecco and amiably throwing up starboard. Sima, then pregnant with Shiva, was not amused and at one point demanded a helicopter evacuate her from the carnage. "This is a business of relationships," Barry kept whispering to her. Value Pro's value rocketed throughout the rest of the summer. Barry's chief investor, Ahmed of the Qatar Investment Authority, looked ready to give Barry a serious Hummer. And then it all went to shit. Someone squealed. Most of the profits were an illusion that came from buying other companies and then using every accounting trick known to man, a roll-up straight out of the Enron manual. The media and the politicians pounced in the way Value Pro had hiked up prices on some life-saving diuretic or whatnot. And the next thing Barry knew, his fiery nebbish friend had checked into rehab with a $15 million severance package. Barry's chief of staff, Sandy, had done the impossible and actually got him on the phone in rehab, but all he managed to do was croak out the single word, "value." Barry wanted to stand by his friend, this guy who had accomplished so much with, socially speaking, so little. He held tight to his position, and a month later, the stock had plunged from 500 to 50. Another month later, there was no stock. "I would never trade Value Pro," Jeff Parks said. "There was a lot of hair in that company. In fact, to be honest, I shorted it." "Oh," Barry said, "I thought all your trades were long-term." "I couldn't help myself. That was low-hanging fruit. It was the opposite of value investing." "Don't get all Warren Buffett on me," Barry said. The men walked along in silence. They were in a deeply forested part of the Beltline where the sounds and circumstances of city life were few, and for a second Barry felt they had left humanity entirely. "Can I offer you just one piece of advice," Barry said, "as an older person?" He knew the Chinese revered their elders. "You can get a better watch than a Rolex Skydweller. It looks like a Russian oligarch died on your wrist." "That's not the image someone as smart as you wants to project." Jeff laughed. "Ouch," he said. "I guess I struck a chord with Value Pro. I'm sorry, man." Barry sighed. "Why was it so hard to mentor this slender young man?" "All I'm saying is that you should be projecting your taste to others of your stature, not to a Southern belle in a leg cast." "What's on your wrist?" Jeff asked. "This is an FP Journe Octa Automatique. Journe makes 900 watches a year. Rolex makes 1 million. Jeff held Barry's hand by the wrist and examined the watch. His hand was warm and dry, just like Sima's. He said. "I like how the yellow gold hour and minute dials are lost in all the negative space around them. That's very cool." "Thanks," Barry said. He smiled. "You have very promising aesthetics." "But," Jeff said, "the Southern belles we just saw, they would know exactly what a Rolex is, but they would have no idea about your watch. You bought it at the airport." "A Rolex of this size and weight merely announces the scale of my ambitions. I want to represent my value." "But you must also own a Patek Philippe. I saw their magazine in your bathroom." "I got a 1518 Perpetual in steel." "Wow," Barry sighed. That rare watch was probably worth as much as Jeff's whole apartment. He wanted to feel good for this young man who was helping him out so much just when he needed it. Instead, he felt envious. No angry wife, no autistic child, no possible subpoena, just 2 good cars, a 7-figure watch, and time to read as many books as he pleased. "I have a different takeaway from that Value Pro story," Jeff Parks said. They were circling back to the former industrial building that now served as a mall. "You tried to make a friend who turned out to be a bad person, and when he fell, you stood by him." Yeah, but that's the kind of life lesson I should have learned by high school, Barry said. Believe me, you're not as stunted as some of the other people I've met over the years. Thank you, Barry said. I appreciate that. The Ferrari had been parked in a special VIP zone, and now a young man ran to retrieve it. They went home to examine Jeff Park's watch collection. Thank you.
So there were a lot of people, Gary, very worried about your relationships to hedge fund managers at this point. They were curious as to, did you make friends with these hedge fund managers? Did your opinion of hedge fund managers change throughout your research? And what is your greatest fear about their response to this representation of hedge fund managers? How do you think they'll respond?
I'll start with that. So a lot of in the acknowledgement section, there's, I think, in all my books, I think hundreds of people. And many of them, so a few of them were very reticent. They liked the book, but they were reticent to have their name revealed to other hedge fund managers. So they said, please don't use my name or ever mention me in a public setting or call me or Skype. So that was a big concern for them. But a few people were actually brave enough to put their names down. And there's two really big hedge fund managers listed in the acknowledgement section. Look, like I said, I don't have any friends in New York. They're all gone. They're all in Portland and Abu Dhabi and wherever they can find employment. Berlin, if they're hipsters, And so for me, I needed to make some new friends because there was nobody left. So I did make friends with a few who were, much more, I guess, more progressive. And there's a scene in this book that is actually taken completely from real life, which is the election day party in November, which we know how that ended. But it was a Democratic crowd, and seeing these people, and it was a really interesting kind of feeling because it was a Democratic crowd, and yet the imbalance, the inequities that stuff like hedge funds perpetuate was part of the reasons. Well, one reason perhaps for the election results. So here they were on the right side of history, but they were contributing to the wrong side of it.
With your track record of predicting the future, what are your thoughts about the next U.S. presidential election?
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I think this is Joe Biden's to lose.
Oh, God.
We need somebody in their 80s to fix things because people in their 70s, as we can see, just can't do it. Yeah, I would say this would be a Joe Biden thing. No, I don't know. I can't honestly predict that Trump will not win a second term. I know. I'm sorry, but I really can't predict that. I don't know what will happen. This is a very loud wave, and it's happening across other parts of Europe and other countries, from Hungary to, you can even throw India in there, and if you look at the authoritarian trend, China falls into that nicely, Turkey, Russia, I mean, good Lord, what's left, just Canada. And even in Canada, Ontario may vote in a Trumpist, right? So given all that, I don't know. The big thing to watch is the midterm elections. And please vote. I don't know if you were in a district. I vote upstairs, I almost said. I vote upstate because I have a house there, and there's a real swing district where we are, as opposed to New York where you know what was going to happen. But I think this is this trend is not just going to stop. It has to be rolled back, and everyone has to be responsible for doing so.
So there were a few questions you brought up. Your relationship with your editor. Have you worked with the same editor on all 5 of your books?
No, I've jumped around, and editors have left me and said, this is not good work. I'm going to work with Salman Rushdie now. But my new editor is great. She's she's the publisher of Random House, so she's very, Susan Camel, terrific editor. She's the woman that basically gave me the 160-page response to my 160 pages of crap. What a nice way to do that, right? Not say, stop writing it, because she would never do that, but rather to say, I'm just going to rebut every single word you've said, no, and, so working with her was great. I really do listen to editors. I listen to, so each book has like a whole bunch of people attached to it. So Super Sad, there was all of my friends who worked in technology were helping me out. Super Sad had a Korean American character, so all my Korean friends, and including my wife, were helping out. This book is finance, so there was a whole bunch of finance people, and also Seema is Indian American, so there were Tamil to be exact, so a lot of my Tamilian friends were helping out, especially in the food department, because there's a whole chapter that's just this giant food thing. Oh, God, I love that chapter.
Reading Ruskies would like to know, how was your work received in Russia?
Not good, not good, not good. The best headline I ever had was a balding traitor betrays motherland, and that's in Russia. That's a very positive statement. There was
Make it two.
make it two, yeah. No, the others were like Steingart pleases his CIA masters, which okay, fine, but balding traitor betrays motherland is beautiful. That was the main blurb on the book, So not good, not good. And the sales also suck. I think I sell more in Belgium than I sell in Russia. And Russia's a bigger country, apparently.
Somebody wanted to know if you speak Russian with your kid, or do you read Russian literature to him, and why or why not?
I like reading children's poetry to him because it's so much better than English poetry. English poetry, Jack and Jill went up to the condo and they couldn't afford the maintenance. Beautiful poetry, I'm sure, but Russian poetry, like, рысь рычит на берегу, поймать рыбку не могу, хоть она не вдалеке, не поймать ее в реке. And your kid's like, holy shit, this is poetry. Like, but let's practice the condo one too, because you'll need that.
Miriam is very worried. She wants to know why so many immigrants from Russia voted for Trump.
Look, I mean, Russians always, for the most part, vote Republican, which has there's a genesis of many reasons for that. When they emigrated, they believed the Democratic Party was close to a socialist party and only Reagan republicanism could fight the Soviet Union, so they invested their political energies into that. But also they're culturally a lot more conservative. And I'm talking about an older generation, they wear white suits and stuff like that, and they're much older. Among the younger generations, such as myself, there's quite a few Russians who are I think pretty copacetic with being progressive. So there is a bit of a culture clash going on. But I think, and this is a pattern that also, the Cuban Americans have also gone through this kind of pattern. Older Cubans, of course, are traditionally Republican, but if you talk to younger Cubans in Miami-Dade, you'll see that things are changing. Let's hope they change fast.
So back to the book. Someone mentioned that anyone who works in finance will associate Seema, which is the name of Barry's wife, with Seema from CNBC.
Oh.
And they wanted to know if it was intentional.
Not at all. No. Seema is a very popular name. I think it means limit, doesn't it? Anyone? No? But Seema is a pretty popular name. I've known many Seemas. But that is, and other people have asked me if Barry Cohen is modeled on Stevie Cohen, who's a big schmuck. No, not at all. They're very, very different. When Random House was going through legal, they asked me, to make sure that wasn't the same guy. And I said, no.
So another question about the book was, what was your rationale for referring to Jeff Park by his full name, consistently throughout that piece?
Oh yeah, well, because that's the joke for people who understand that Jeff Park is a Korean name, and Barry kept getting it wrong.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. Am I beating a horse to death? Because you either get the joke or you don't. But and I also love saying Jeff Park out loud. It's such a great name. I know so many Jeff Parks. I went to Stuyvesant, which was all Korean, Indian, and Russian and Chinese. So we were a land of Parks and Lees and Kims.
And Steingarts.
And the occasional Stein.
And the occasional Steingart.
Yeah.
There were actually a couple questions that spoke to this as well, which was, how do you sort of negotiate representing people of other races when you're doing that, especially in marked language?
Yeah, no, this has been, it's, there's questions around this, and the only way I can really do it is to marinate myself in whatever culture I'm covering it. I've been lucky that, so far, Korean culture is super sad, and I would say literally 40% of my very best friends are Korean. My mentor was Chang-Rae Lee, the Korean-American writer. Mm-hmm. My wife is Korean-American. So yeah, and my child is half Korean. I'm doing really well on that front. So I feel, and the Koreans are always like, oh my God, you're almost Korean, And also, Korean anxiety and Jewish anxiety goes together so nicely. It's a beautiful, and the love of cabbage.
Right. And pickled things.
And pickled things.
Pickled things.
Yeah, no, my kid was, he was 2 years old, so the first things he said was, he was walking down the street and he saw this pigeon on a high wire, And he said, "Pigeon, don't fall, okay?" And that was just such an expression of both our cultures. You know? We rewarded him with a big cabbage. And this book was Indian, and so I've also had had an Indian, a Tamil girlfriend, and many of my best friends, like Sukita Mehta, the journalist. I'm friends with Salman, so I'm in that world a lot. So, and they also read it and corrected a few things, and so I feel like a lot of research and a real feeling for that culture is required. But there could be also pushback. People could say, you know, screw you, Steingart. What do you know about being a Gujarati? You know, so I'm waiting for that too.
How would you describe your relationship with Israel?
Oh, wow. I've been there many times. We sell well there. And I have a lot of good Israeli friends. Edgar Carrot.
Yeah.
Come on. Yeah? David Grossman.
Yeah.
David Melech Yisrael, yeah? Hi. Yeah, no, totes. Many friends, and I've been around also the you know, Palestine or the territories, however you want to call them, to visit Hebron, for example, with a group called Breaking the Silence, and to see conditions there. So I've also been invited by Israeli cultural institutions, Palestinian cultural institutions. So I feel like I know the area well. But you know, my feelings right now is my own house is on fire, and as much as I want Israel to work out and feel certain tendencies there mirror the ones in here, I'm also really busy with my fire hose trying to put out the fire in my own building, which happens to be America.
Right.
You mentioned that you're going to write your last book at the age of 74.
Yeah.
What will that book be about? And if you had to blurb it, what would that blurb look like?
Not since Philip Roth's last book have I read so much about dentures.